Usually, when you think about professional sports, you tend to think about the physical limits, right?
Oh, absolutely. The human element.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You think about pulled hamstrings or, the weather just completely turning the pitch into mud or muscle fatigue in the fourth quarter. It's this very biological, messy grind.
Right. In traditional sports, human error is basically the most persistent variable on the field. You can't escape it.
But so what happens when you strip all of that flesh and bone away? What happens when you replace the grass with a tabletop and the unpredictable bounce of an oval ball with the cold, hard, mathematical roll of the dice?
Well, you'd think it becomes perfectly clean, wouldn't you?
Right. You might assume it becomes predictable, even safe. But today, we are immersing you in a data-rich source that proves the exact opposite. We're looking at the preview for AFT Dice Season 12, specifically diving into the Round 8 matchups and predictions, scheduled for this Sunday, March 29th, 2026.
And it is a massive week.
It really is. The mission of this deep dive into the source material is to analyze the utterly chaotic landscape of this dice-based AFL simulation. We're going to figure out if Round 8 will cement the ironclad dominance of the current top 4 teams, or, if it's going to ignite a complete fiery revolution right in the middle of the ladder.
And I mean, we are at the absolute perfect inflection point for that kind of analysis. The midpoint of the season is usually where those early statistical anomalies start to flatten out into hard realities.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the stakes detailed in this preview feel incredibly high right now.
Extremely high.
The ladder is just so volatile, everyone is jockeying for position. It feels like one bad Game 1 terrible sequence of rolls could mathematically lock a team out of a decent finish. So, ground us in the narrative here.
Yeah.
Where are these teams mentally and, I guess, statistically as they head into Round 8?
Well, to really understand the pressure of Round 8, you have to look back at the massive shockwaves generated by Round 7.
Right, last week was insane.
It fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of the league. I mean, we saw shocking upsets, most notably the Brisbane Lions completely stunning the West Coast Eagles.
Nobody saw that coming.
No one. But maybe more importantly, we saw these absolute ceiling-shattering performances. The Gold Coast Suns put up an explosive 143 points.
Which is just absurd.
Exactly. So the analytical framework we really need to use for you today is this tension between momentum and probability.
See, I look at Gold Coast putting up 143 points in a dice game, and my immediate thought is, well, they just got incredibly lucky.
A lot of people think that.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's a fluke, a statistical anomaly that they shouldn't even try to replicate because the odds are totally against them. Tell me why I'm wrong.
It's totally tempting to look at a tabletop simulation and just chalk a massive scoreline up to rolling sixes all night.
Yeah, just hot dice.
Yeah. But in a sophisticated system like AFT Dice, a 143-point game usually requires a deeply optimized strategy that actually allows that luck to compound. You don't score that high by accident.
So they built an engine for it.
Precisely. You score that high by actively choosing high-yield, aggressive, offensive strategy tables over, say, conservative possession tables. And then, yes, hitting the probabilities perfectly. The tension we're analyzing today is whether that specific strategy is sustainable against a league that is now actively adapting to it.
Which perfectly brings us to the very top of the ladder. If we want to understand adaptation and dominance, we have to look at the apex predators.
The big dogs.
Exactly. We are heading to Marvel Stadium for what the preview basically frames as the main event. We've got North Melbourne sitting imperiously at 6-1, facing off against a surging Collingwood, who are sitting at 4-3.
North Melbourne is currently serving as the benchmark for the entire competition right now.
They really are.
They are the absolute model of consistency in what is inherently an inconsistent dice-driven system.
They feel like the final boss in a video game right now. You just can't touch them.
Yeah.
But here's my hesitation. The preview notes that Collingwood is bringing serious offensive fire to this matchup.
Right.
Mechanically speaking, how does a team bring offensive fire to a tabletop? Is that just, a fancy way of saying they're going to roll the dice harder?
Not quite, no. When the preview mentions offensive fire, it's really talking about risk profiling.
Okay.
A team like Collingwood sitting at 4-3, they recognize that playing a standard balanced game against a 6-1 juggernaut is basically a recipe for a slow, agonizing defeat.
Because the math just slowly grinds you down.
Exactly. North Melbourne didn't get to 6-1 when making mistakes. They got there by playing the percentages flawlessly. So mechanically, Collingwood's manager will likely utilize high variance strategy tables.
High variance, so big swings.
Huge swings. They are opting for tactical choices that have a much lower percentage chance of actually succeeding, but they yield massive point multipliers if they do hit. They're bypassing the safe, guaranteed low point options entirely.
So you basically actively inject chaos into the game to break the opponent's stable math.
Precisely. You have to introduce variance to break a stable system. When you're facing an optimized machine, playing conservatively just guarantees you lose to the house edge.
You have to try and break the bank.
You have to go for broke, yeah.
That sets up two radically different outcomes for this Sunday. On one hand, North Melbourne absorbs that high variance pressure, systematically dismantles Collingwood's aggressive plays, and extends their lead to 7-1.
Which is the most statistically likely outcome.
Right. And if they do that, they're essentially insulating themselves mathematically from future risks for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
But what if Collingwood's offensive fire actually works?
Well, if Collingwood secures the upset, they throw the top of the ladder into utter chaos.
This is a total mess.
Yeah, this specific matchup is really the litmus test for the mid-table revolution that the source material keeps pointing to. If Collingwood wins by rolling the dice on high-variance strategies, it proves the 6-1 benchmark can actually bleed.
It gives everyone else a roadmap.
Exactly. It gives the rest of the league a blueprint for how to punch up against the top tier.
Which brings us right back to the team that literally wrote the blueprint on punching up last week, the Gold Coast Suns.
The giant killers right now.
Seriously. They are sitting in 6th place, heading to Metricon Stadium to face the 3rd place West Coast Eagles. Now, the Eagles took that shock loss to the Brisbane Lions, so they're bleeding.
They're definitely wounded.
And the Suns are coming off that historic 143-point explosion. Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. How does a team that relies on rigid structure handle a team that is riding a chaotic high? The preview describes the Eagles as a clinical machine.
A very apt description.
Right. But what does that actually mean in a game of pure probability?
A clinical machine in AFT Dice means a team whose strategy is built entirely around high floor, low ceiling probabilities.
So they don't care about the big flashy plays.
Not at all. They want to minimize the impact of bad rolls. They choose safe ball movement tables. They prioritize defensive structures that force the opponent to roll against negative modifiers. And they just slowly, methodically grind out advantages.
Death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly. They don't need to score 143 points. They just need to consistently score 85 while holding you to 70.
But the Eagles' systems were completely disrupted by the Lions last week. And now they're walking into a matchup against a wild card team fresh off a historic high.
This is the ultimate system shock test. Examining how a highly structured top 3 team handles a disruptive force is just fascinating game theory.
Because the Eagles have to prove last week was a fluke.
Right. The Eagles are desperate to reestablish their clinical baseline. Meanwhile, the Suns are trying to prove their 143-point game wasn't just catching lightning in a bottle, but rather a permanent storm front that they can summon at will.
I love that.
If the Eagles' structure can contain the Suns' momentum, it basically validates the conservative, math-heavy approach to the game.
But if the Suns blow the doors off them,
then the rest of the league genuinely needs to panic, because it means the Suns have actually solved the offensive mechanics of the simulation.
Wow. That is a terrifying prospect for the team sitting right below them. Because if the Suns are climbing, someone else is getting pushed down.
That's just the math of the ladder.
We really need to talk about the messy middle of this ladder.
Yeah.
The preview highlights an absolute traffic jam of teams sitting on a 4-3 record.
It's incredibly crowded.
We've got the Geelong Cats in 9th at 4-3, facing off against Richmond, who are 4th at 5-2 at GMHBA Stadium. We have Hawthorn versus Carlton at Marvel Stadium, both stuck in that 4-3 cluster. And Port Adelaide taking on Essendon at the Adelaide Oval, which the source explicitly flags as a battle for mid-table separation.
The 4-3 cluster is easily the most dangerous real estate in the league right now. You are one roll away from contention and literally one roll away from total irrelevance.
Standing on a 4-3 record must feel like standing on a trapdoor. Let's look at Geelong versus Richmond. This is a massive top 8 shaping battle. Who carries more psychological weight into a matchup like this? Is it the Tigers at 5-2, knowing they have a top 4 spot to lose? Or is it the Cats, who are desperate to break through the trapdoor and get into the elite bracket?
This actually brings up a really critical behavioral economic concept, which is loss aversion.
Okay, lay that out for us.
In mathematical simulations, protecting what you already have often drives highly conservative decision-making. Richmond has the 5-2 record. They have the top 4 spot.
So they have everything to lose.
Right. The pressure on them is strictly to maintain the status quo, which might actually make their simulated tactical choices too rigid. Geelong, sitting right on the edge at 9th, they don't have that burden at all.
They're the hunters.
They are the hunters. And the mathematical models often favor the team willing to take calculated risks over the team playing simply not to lose.
So Geelong might actually employ some of that offensive fire we talked about with Collingwood.
Exactly. And that's exactly why these specific matches like Hawthorn against Carlton, Port Adelaide against Essendon are functioning as the filters for the league this season.
Wait, you're losing me a bit here. You call them filters. Why does playing a similarly ranked team change the math of the season more than, say, a top team playing a bottom team? Doesn't a win count as a win regardless?
Well, yes, a win is a win on the raw points table. But think about the concept of mid-table separation statistically.
Okay.
Think of the season as a funnel. Right now, the middle is totally clogged. When a 6-1 team plays a 1-6 team, the statistical model already expects a certain result.
Right, the good team should win.
Exactly. And if the 6-1 team wins, the underlying math of the league's hierarchy doesn't actually shift much. But when 2, 4, and 3 teams clash, it's a zero-sum game with massive swing potential.
Oh, I see.
The winner mathematically vaults into the upper echelon of probability for making the finals, while the loser is filtered down into a statistical hole that becomes exponentially harder to climb out of. These games dictate the actual shape of the final ladder far more than the blowouts do.
So the middle of the pack is actually where the most brutal high-stakes math is being executed.
Without a doubt.
You are either filtered up into the elite or you are mathematically crushed into the forgotten. That is incredibly harsh.
It's the reality of a finite season. The math is totally unforgiving.
Well, if that is the pressure of trying to break into the top 4, imagine the psychological shift of having absolutely zero pressure at all. Let's leave the crowded middle and look at the absolute fringes of the league.
The extremes.
Right. We're talking about the teams trying to dominate every single metric and the teams who are just trying to survive the weekend.
The contrast here in round 8 is pretty stark.
It really is. We have the Brisbane Lions taking on Melbourne at the Gabba in what the preview dubs the Battle of the Percentage Kings. We've got the Adelaide Crows sitting pretty in second place at 5-2, hosting St. Kilda, who are languishing down in 15th.
And that's a tough spot for St. Kilda.
Huge. The source makes a very specific point to remind us that Adelaide has previously dismantled opponents by 64 points. Then we had the Sydney Swans defending their home fortress at the SCG against Fremantle. And then we have the Western Bulldogs.
Ah, yes.
Sitting at 0-7, winless.
Yeah.
Facing the GWS Giants at Marvel Stadium.
A true slate of extremes, like you said.
So what does this all mean? The preview calls the Bulldogs game the Breakthrough Watch and mentions they're playing purely for pride and progress.
Which is an interesting way to phrase it.
Let me pitch a theory to you. A team with an 0-7 record, playing with absolutely zero expectations, is actually the most dangerous opponent a structured team like GWS could possibly face.
The real insight there is about systemic desperation.
How so?
Well, in game theory, when your expected win rate drops to 0, like when your traditional strategies have mathematically failed 7 weeks in a row, the optimal play is to maximize variance.
You just go crazy.
You don't try to play better than your opponent, you try to play weirder.
Because chaos is literally the only equalizer against a superior system.
Exactly. For the GWS Giants, who are sitting in 13th and are absolutely desperate to climb out of the bottom third, facing an unpredictable 0-7 team is a nightmare scenario.
Right, because they just won a normal game.
The Giants want to execute a structured, predictable game plan to easily secure 4 points. But the Bulldogs have absolutely nothing to lose. They can throw the tactical playbook right out the window, kick the most erratic, high-risk strategy tables available, and just start rolling for the fences.
It's a classic trap game.
The ultimate trap game.
Contrast that 0-7 chaos with the absolute buzzsaw that St. Kilda's walking into. They are in 15th place, traveling to the Adelaide Oval to face the second-place Crows. And again, the preview reminds us, Adelaide can put up 64-point blowouts.
Yeah, that matchup is the polar opposite of the Bulldogs game.
It feels like a scheduled execution.
Pretty much. Think of Adelaide's strategy like a casino counting cards. They aren't trying to win one massive lucky roll. A 64-point blowout in a dice simulation represents an overwhelming, suffocating statistical advantage.
It's not luck, it's design.
Exactly. Adelaide is making hundreds of tiny, mathematically optimized choices over the course of the game so that by the time you hit the fourth quarter, the house edge is insurmountable. St. Kilda isn't just fighting the Crows. They are fighting the overwhelming weight of mathematical probability that heavily favors the home team's optimized system.
Which perfectly explains the percentage kings battle between Brisbane and Melbourne.
Yes, absolutely. Brisbane stunning the Eagles last week didn't just give them a win, it fundamentally altered their percentage.
Which is huge.
And you have to remember, in a league where the middle is a massive traffic jam of 4 and 3 records, your percentage is very often the only tiebreaker at the end of the season.
Right. So Brisbane and Melbourne both know this isn't just about getting the victory at the GABA. It's about the math. Running up the score to inflate your percentage is essentially buying an insurance policy for the playoffs.
That's a perfect way to look at it. They aren't just playing to win, they're playing to maximize the yield of the victory.
Every point matters.
Every single dice roll in that game is going to be weighed against that insurance policy. If you are up by 20 points in the fourth quarter, do you play safe and run down the clock? Or do you keep rolling on aggressive tables to try and stretch it to a 40-point margin, knowing that extra 20 points might be the exact margin that secures you a final spot in 10 weeks?
It's incredible how much depth there is in a seemingly simple simulation preview.
Yep.
I mean, we started this deep dive looking at a list of matchups and dice rolls, but what we've actually been analyzing is human psychology, risk management, and game theory.
It's a lot more than just plastic dice on a table.
For you listening, even if you aren't managing a tabletop sports franchise on a Sunday afternoon, there's a real masterclass here in dealing with volatile environments.
Oh, completely. The mechanics of this simulation perfectly mirror the mechanics of navigating any complex, unpredictable system in the real world. It teaches us how past performance dictates future pressure. I mean, we see how a 143-point explosive high forces a team like the Suns to continually prove their new baseline, while in 0-7 snump frees the Bulldogs to radically abandon their old strategies and just embrace chaos.
Because they have to.
Right. We see how clinical, structured systems have to remain incredibly resilient when hit with sudden shock disruptions. The math of the dice might be rigid and cold, but how a manager responds to that math has to be fluid, adaptive, and honestly, sometimes a little ruthless.
It really all comes down to identifying when to trust the probabilities and when you are forced to break them. And if we connect this all back to the entire Round 8 slate, it leaves us with a really compelling tension.
It really does.
The preview sets up this massive conflict between established dominance like North Melbourne's 6-1 record and the potential for a mid-table revolution.
The clinical final boss versus the fiery disruptors. Exactly. But here's the thought I want to leave you with today. In a league that is ultimately determined by the random, impartial roll of a die, what does sustained dominance actually mean?
That's interesting.
Does a 6-1 record imply that pure human strategy, risk profiling, and table selection can genuinely overpower mathematical luck? Or, are we just witnessing a temporary, fleeting illusion of control right before the dice eventually equalize everyone and bring the leaders crashing back down to the mathematical mean?
That is the ultimate question.
Yeah.
Are these managers masters of the game or just incredibly lucky so far? I guess we will have to see how the dice fall this Sunday, March 29th. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material for AFT Dice Season 12. Keep an eye out for those trapdoors, and we will catch you next time.